Hello everyone and welcome back to another Backlog Bonfire. For those that are unfamiliar, these videos serve as a set of yearly checkpoints for my gaming backlog, where I briefly go over some of my thoughts for all the games I played that didn't get to star in their own videos. It also doesn't provide anything in terms of visuals beyond what you're looking at right now, so it's intended to be listened to in the background rather than watched. So feel free to do your chores, play a few rounds of your favorite roguelike, draw some art or whatever it is you like to do while I yap about some video games. This is of course the second episode as the title suggests, so it will cover everything I played since the first episode. If you missed that episode, which was split into two parts because it covered a span of almost 2 years rather than one, you can find it in the description. Do be warned of its quality though, as I tried to make that one without a script but just a handful of cliff notes for each game. It didn't turn out as well as most of my other videos because of that, so I'm returning to a scripted format for these videos as well from now on. This video will also be completely spoiler free for each game that will be discussed, so you don't have to worry about that. With all that being said, let's start the list. Number 1. Dark Souls 3. To absolutely no one's surprise, the first game I played since the first episode, which ended with Dark Souls 1 and 2, was Dark Souls 3. I loved the game, but I won't be talking about it here since I've already made a video on this game called I Really Need to Talk About Dark Souls 3. If you want to hear me gush about why I love this title, go watch that video. Number 2. Arzette and the Jewel of Faramore. This game and its reception is kind of fascinating to me. I don't say that because I think it's severely overrated or underrated or anything like that. I think that the game is just fine. It's nothing mind-blowing, but it is a fun time and that seems to be the general consensus anyway, as its 7.6 Metacritic user score would suggest. But I'd say this is still an interesting result compared to what I would normally expect. However, Arzette's case is far from normal. For those of you that don't know, Arzette is a spiritual successor to Zelda CDI, those bootleg looking Zelda games with Morshu and the other meme stuff in them. And although I never played those games, I can easily tell even from just looking at a couple of Zelda CDI clips that Arzette is the better game, even if it's not nearly as iconic. It is to be expected when the bar is set so low, but it doesn't mean Arzette doesn't have its own fair share of flaws. The boss fights are quite underwhelming and easy to cheese. The jokes and goofy characters keep things fun up to a certain point, but the tone begins to feel more and more stale as time goes on, if you ask me. The performances don't ramp up in their eccentricity as the game goes on, nor do they get more and more serious as the stakes escalate. They just stay as they are throughout the whole game, and so you become disillusioned with them after a while, I'd say, anticipating what goofy MS Paint interaction you'll see next less and less as time goes on. The music is fine, the level design ranges from barely anything to okay, and the mechanics are serviceable for the game's premise and length, and so on. I won't get into every little detail, but what I'm getting at is the game being closer to a 6 than a 7.5 for me, really. That of course is still a passing grade, and so I don't really regret the time I spent with this title, especially since it's a short one. But really, the actual reason I appreciate this game so much is because of how unique its situation is. It's a fascinating case study, as I have never seen before a spiritual successor to a bad game. A game that is beloved not genuinely but ironically. I mean, think about most of the games out there that wear their inspirations on their sleeves. We have games that try to emulate the style and substance of things like Dark Souls, Resident Evil, Ace Combat, and for the most part these games are only seen as worthy successors or alternatives if they are absolutely masterful, while anything below is seen as a cheap imitation. But in the case of Arzette, people are just happy that they can even somewhat experience the meme-worthy goofiness of Zelda CDI in an actually playable state at all. Its C+ performance is more than enough, to a degree that what it tries to emulate does not decrease its value in the eyes of its audience but enhances it. It's not a weight upon its shoulders but a helping hand. Of course, I'm not trying to paint what was done here as some coldly calculated business decision when it's clearly not. There's obviously a great amount of passion and care that was put into this game, which is why I do feel kind of bad for calling it a mere 6 out of 10 or C+, but that doesn't mean I wouldn't give it an A for effort. It's just that my audience must come first, and I have to be honest to them about what to expect. In a vacuum, Arzette and the Jewel of Faramore is fun yet nothing too special, but it is certainly a fascinating piece of media within the context of its release. Number 3. Limbo. I honestly can't believe it took me this long to try out this game, since I remember it being everywhere for a while way back when YouTube was in its Let's Play era. The game has also kept getting ridiculous discounts every now and then ever since, but for some reason I only decided to get it last year and play it this year. I think the reason was that I didn't think it had a lot to offer to me beyond what I could see on the surface level whenever people mentioned it, and now that I've finally experienced it, I can say that I was certainly right about that. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying this to devalue what Limbo has to offer, but if you've seen just a few clips and formed a general idea of what the game is like in your head, it's most likely an accurate one. After I made it to the end, really all I thought about the game was, yep, that's pretty much what I was expecting. Limbo does have good puzzles, a pretty purposeful and distinct art style, and an oppressive atmosphere, but those have all been done better countless times in games of all kinds since its release, and it doesn't really present much that would stick with you beyond these elements. It unfortunately just ends up being a look into the past to see what impressed and inspired us back then, rather than the discovery of something timeless. So if you're interested in the former and have a couple of bucks and hours to spend, go try it out if you still haven't already. Otherwise, you're not really missing out on too much. Number 4. Anomaly Agent. Those among you who are Turkish like I am will probably guess why this game ever fell into my radar at all. It's made by a small company founded by a pretty popular Turkish YouTuber and made some noise here because of that. But don't think for a second that's the reason I've given it a chance. I don't vibe with the idea of playing or supporting a game solely because the developers are from around here. I'll play any game from anywhere and recommend it to people if it seems good and or interesting to me, and that's it. Anomaly Agent did seem like the type of game I would enjoy from what I had seen, so I gave it a shot, and I'm happy that I did. It was a really fun few hours for the most part, even though I found parts of it frustrating or underwhelming. The story was definitely the biggest letdown for me, as I found it not even convoluted and messy, but borderline incomprehensible. The final act especially made me not only question how and when the hell we got here, but also left me wondering about a bunch of things that I thought would be answered. The level design was another aspect I found to be lackluster at points. While I have no problem with the game being a linear string of rooms, these rooms often do have some amount of verticality with enemies present at multiple of its floors, and yet everyone, both you and the enemies, can only attack to your left and right, which makes these rooms with multiple floors feel like just one long corridor instead. I think it's a big missed opportunity in a game like this that combat only takes place in one axis for the most part, making the 2D game feel 1D instead. It's especially disappointing since the combat is otherwise so satisfying. There are a good number of combos and special moves at your disposal that keeps the incentive to experiment high enough throughout the game. Parrying and dodging are both viable defensive options in most cases, but enemy numbers and toughness steeply ramp up as well, so that the game gets more and more challenging at a steady pace outside of just a few encounters here and there that feel like sudden difficulty spikes out of nowhere. The art style is nothing that we haven't seen before, but it is still quite well made and fits the game really well. The soundtrack was an unexpected highlight for me. I didn't expect some of the tracks to go this hard and find myself even listening to a few of them on loop after I was done with the game itself. And one last thing I have to mention is how surprisingly effective the humor is sometimes. There were a few moments that legit made me audibly laugh at the shenanigans that were happening. Overall, I'd say Anomaly Agent is well worth the few bucks and hours that it costs, especially considering that it also has a bonus roguelike mode I haven't tried for myself for those that can't get enough of the game after finishing it. It does have its flaws, but they don't detract that much from the overall experience, and I have full confidence that with more experience and time to cook, the developers can make fewer of these mistakes next time while also improving on what's already great here. The next game in this series, Anomaly President, was announced not too long ago, and I'm very excited to give it a shot when it comes out. Number 5. Crow Country. Oh, Crow Country. I really wanted to like this game as much as everyone else did, but the number of times I've seen its quality regarded as almost or exactly equal to Signalis made me really expect more than this. I do think the game is really good and definitely worth the time and money investment. I loved the art style and atmosphere. The puzzles were great besides that one dining room one with the mushrooms. You know the reason if you played the game. The story felt pretty unique and interesting to me as well. I definitely wasn't expecting it to go to the places that it did, and I was invested the whole way through. I also loved how the map was so thoughtfully designed, with each save point placed in just the perfect spot and none of the areas being that much of a pain to backtrack to thanks to the many shortcuts you unlock. But that's where my praises for the game end, and I now want to move on to why I didn't find it to be the flawless masterpiece I expected. First of all, I have no issue with a game being built for controller primarily, but that doesn't mean the keyboard and mouse controls have to be beyond unintuitive, borderline unusable with no possible way to rebind any of it. I would even go so far as to say that it's bad enough to be considered a legitimate accessibility issue. I am no game dev, but you cannot tell me that they couldn't find a better set of buttons than these for the controls. It feels like a deliberate attempt to keep you away from the keyboard and mouse at all costs, especially the mouse since it isn't even used for anything for some reason. This next point is a more personal gripe, but I don't like how the game plays that much even when you have a controller either. It's similar to those old ass fixed camera survival horror games where you have to gauge where you're aiming at by your character model since there's no reticle or anything like that. I bet that's some good nostalgia for people who grew up with those games, but for me it just kind of ended up making the combat feel awkward and unreliable. You may say it's an added layer of challenge, but I'd rather have that extra layer be something else, especially when the threats are this underwhelming. I don't know if I'm the only one that feels this way since I've never seen a mention of it before, but I found the enemies to be way too scarce and unthreatening. The first encounter with each type was certainly tense because I didn't know how tough it would be or what it would do, but that's about it. Now you may say that it's because I played on survival and not Murder of Crows, but I'd still expect the standard difficulty level to be a more balanced one rather than one that's so skewed in my favor. I think one thing that could remedy all of this would be respawning enemies. Their exclusion is honestly somewhat surprising considering how big of a staple they are in the genre. It wouldn't just make the game more difficult but also introduce more strategy to spice up the gameplay. My last issue is the lack of any real inventory management. You never really have to leave anything behind unless it's an excess amount of a single type of ammo. You have a dedicated slot for every single thing in the game, including weapons, ammo, heals and key items. This means that you can carry every weapon and every key item with you at all times, that nothing takes up more space in your inventory than anything else, and that you can't hoard an excess amount of something by allocating less space for anything else. For instance, you can't have 2 full stacks of shotgun shells by spending or leaving all your handgun ammo to make more space for it. Sucks to be you. One of those slots is for shotgun shells only and the other is for handgun bullets only, even if it's empty. Now I do get that this is a deliberate design choice, but there is no reason for it to be favorable over any kind of real inventory management at all in a survival horror game in my opinion. It's become another staple of the genre like respawning enemies for a reason. It introduces fun, strategy and challenge without any of it leading to frustration thanks to save point item boxes. Another signature thing that's missing from this game because it has no reason to exist in the first place without a limited inventory. And it's baffling to me how I've never heard anyone even mention such a glaring missing feature. All the complaints about Signalis' inventory system and none of it about this game's lack of one just makes me wonder at this point if all the survival horror fans out there are actually gaslighting me about their love for the limited inventory while I'm alone out here as a genuine fan of it. But I digress. Overall, Crow Country is a really good game, but I think some aspects of it stay too faithful to its inspirations for its own good, while others would be better off staying more faithful than they are, at least for my taste. Number 6. Valhalla Cyberpunk Bartender Action. I'm not too big on VNs or VN adjacent games, but I kept seeing and hearing about this one everywhere so much that I had to check it out. And I'm really glad I did, because this is one of the coziest, most chill games I have ever played. You know the fantasy of that perfect game to sit back and relax with after a stressful workday? One that will not actually stress you out or frustrate you more but make you unwind? We always say that's what we're looking for as busy and tired people, but we seldom follow up on that promise to ourselves and go play a few rounds of an online shooter or a brutal roguelike or something instead, which is anything but relaxing. By being the exact opposite of that though, I feel like Valhalla has actually made me appreciate games that do not require much active playing and just give you some nice vibes for a few hours. As the name implies, you play as a bartender in a cyberpunk future, and that comes with making drinks. But even more than that, of course, it also comes with talking to people. A bunch. Not every character is created equal, but most are given enough care that they grow on you. However, I think it's really the main character that makes the game as good as it is. See, it's not just mixing drinks and talking to people. There are these other smaller things you do in between, but their briefness doesn't make them any less important. important. On the contrary, they breathe more life into the game. You make playlists for the jukebox to play before every shift, you buy stuff for your house without losing self-restraint so that you can still have enough by the end of each week to pay your bills or rent, you scroll the apps on your phone in the morning which bring you news about the town and sometimes even the world. These may sound like surface level additions, but what really makes them shine is how your character uniquely reacts to each of them. Jill just feels like such a real person. What she does is of course influenced by you to some degree since you play as her, but her personality doesn't shape to your will. The outcomes will of course change based on how well you serve whom and how you manage your finances, but her reactions to these things will stay consistent with her personality, which feels so familiar. She has baggage, she has a crush, she has customers she likes and dislikes, but regardless, she will avoid serious conflict with them, not because she is some pushover that likes to walk on eggshells, but because it's what her job requires. She's a professional. She talks to her cat and fakes its responses. She has specific things she wants to buy more than others. She gets distracted and daydreams at work, etc. There's more I could count about her, but what I'm getting at is that she just feels like someone you closely know. Someone that actually exists because you see every facet and moment of her life and inner thoughts. All the other characters are well written too, but you only talk to them at the bar and thus see just one small part of their life. They tell you about the other parts of course, but it's not really the same as seeing and living it for yourself. But I'm not saying that as a bad thing of course. It's yet another facet of the game that makes it feel grounded, since this is also how it works in real life. Even for most of the people that are closest to you, you only get to know so much about them without sharing a home or life with them. That of course doesn't mean that you care about them any less for that. It's just the way of life. And I think that's what makes this game such a joy to unwind with. It feels like you're catching up with some friends over drinks without the social anxiety that would normally come with that, thanks to experiencing it through the eyes of best girl. Overall, what I'm getting at is not only the fact that Valhalla is great, but also that more people should cosplay as Jill instead of all these anime girls all the time. Come on people, let's broaden our horizons a little. Number 7. Sanabi. I have already talked about this game before, so all I'm going to say here is to go play it right now. It's really something special. If you want to hear all my thoughts in detail, you can find them in the video I made called Love, Death and Robots, but be warned of major spoilers. I highly recommend that you go play the game yourself before watching that. It's not a huge time commitment anyway. The whole thing takes like 9 to 10 hours. Number 8. Otxo. Otxo is a top-down shooter roguelike that has a mostly minimalist yet sexy art style that works great for the game since it provides a unique identity while making sure everything visual is clearly communicated to the player. The bombastic soundtrack and sound design also enhance the action, and the bullet time mechanic is just as fun here as it is in every game it's put in of course. That all being said, I have to disagree with one of the most common praises for this game that I see, that it is a spiritual successor to Hotline Miami, the Hotline Miami 3 we never got. You know the meme of that guy who says a movie gives him Boss Baby vibes because he has never seen another movie besides Boss Baby before? This comment has that kind of energy to me. Of course, the two games do have a lot in common, from the perspective and violence to the points multiplier and the mysterious figures behind shop counters, but Otxo is so vastly different in a lot of its fundamental aspects. You don't have this kind of survivability in Hotline Miami, nor do you have a way to heal from the one bullet graze you can take without dying in that game, or a bullet time mechanic to make dodging easier. But that's because levels are short and disconnected in Hotline Miami, while Otxo asks you to endure a marathon of rooms and floors in a single run. Otxo is also much more focused on ranged combat with only the most occasional melee encounters. I'm not even getting into the differences in setting, lore, themes or art direction. They couldn't be any more obvious even at first glance. But don't be mistaken, I'm not making these distinctions to imply that Otxo fails as a Hotline Miami successor, because it's clearly not trying to be one in the first place. I don't doubt that anyone who calls it that does so as praise and with good intentions, but I don't think it's helpful at all. There's a good chance that Hotline Miami was an inspiration for some of the things here, perhaps even for the whole foundation of the game, but the developers built something completely different on top of it. Otxo has its own unique identity. It tries to do its own thing rather than just replicate what's come before, and whether you like it or not, it definitely succeeds in that. It feels very different from Hotline Miami, and I can confidently say that because I've also played both Hotline Miami games relatively recently. You'll know this if you watch the last Bonfire. Otxo makes me feel different things than those games, makes me try out different strategies and be drawn to different aspects of itself. Calling this game Hotline Miami 3 is not validating in my opinion, but feels unfair and reductive, because it's not a clone or shadow of what came before, but a new flavor. But how good is that flavor is another story. That may sound like I'm going to throw away everything I've just said about the game and tear into it now, but rest assured, there isn't anything wrong with Otxo. It's the genre. Everyone's making a roguelike now. If it's not the game itself, it's the first update or DLC that comes to it, and people are eating it up. The competition is fierce, and so only the best of the best of the best really stand out. Games like The Binding of Isaac, Risk of Rain, and Noita allow for such diverse and broken builds that there is practically no upper limit as to how ridiculous things can get, besides how good your computer is. Then you have games like Vampire Survivors and Balatro, which provide unrivaled convenience for casual play and can even be played on the go by anyone thanks to their mobile ports. And then you have Hades being the only one that has a story which spans over 100 hours across your countless runs, and it somehow never runs out of new story beats or character developments. As if that's not jaw-dropping enough by itself, it's also featured in a game that has a killer soundtrack, some of the best art direction out there, and plays like an absolute dream. In most other genres, having this many amazing titles would be like having the most mouth-watering all-you-can-eat buffet ever. But roguelikes are time sinks. Once you have one or two on your plate, you won't really have much room for anything else for a good while. Most people will try out a new roguelike for a few runs and then just return to the one they know, not because the one they tried out is bad, but they just need to see even more of the one they love. There is still so much to unlock and experiment with after all. I have played Hades for 100 hours until I got all achievements, and Isaac for 500 until I gave up on getting all achievements. With Otxo, I have spent 7.5 before moving on, and those hours were fun, but you really need to promise more in a genre like this if you want me to keep coming back to see what you want me to see, all of what you want me to see, I mean. This isn't a failure of the game, and it isn't a failure at all sales-wise either. Otxo is not live service, so it only needs to be bought rather than played forever. I'm just saying that if you do buy it, expect a good game, but not one that will keep you coming back for more each time. Number 9. Inside. This game is just a perfect example of a team figuring out what they're good at and getting better at it in every way. Limbo was a hit when it came out, as we've already discussed earlier, and I'm so happy to see that Playdead did not take the wrong lesson from that. They could have just kept giving everyone more Limbo instead of pushing themselves further, and it certainly would have kept them comfortably afloat for a while. But Inside is not more Limbo, even if it may look like that at first glance. It has the same DNA, but it is actually the next step of evolution from that in every way. The puzzles and level design are more interesting. The art style, lighting, and especially the masterful animation work makes it still look amazing and immediately recognizable to this day. It plays more smoothly, yet feels more uncomfortable in the best way possible. Everything feels more oppressive despite being more lit up than Limbo. The chases and stealth sections are much more tense and engaging. And of course, as you can guess, the one thing I appreciate the most is the storytelling improvement. For a quiet and seemingly cryptic game, Limbo was actually pretty straightforward and understandable. Inside, on the other hand, gives you much more to think about and theorize. I had a lot of questions in my head once I was finished with the game, but that only made me more invested. It hits that perfect spot, just as games like Signalis do, for instance, where you can't piece together everything in the first time you experience it, but you understand just enough to be able to tell that it's worth digging deeper from there. Once I began doing that for Inside, I loved how many different interpretations I've come across regarding what everything in the game, from the protagonist and the enemies to each of the environments and hazards, represents. I liked some of the discussions I've seen so much that it even kind of made me wish I had played the game around the time it came out, so that I could have been a part of those discussions at the height of the game's popularity. What I'm getting at with all of this is that you should give this game a shot no matter when you're watching this video. If you ask me, Limbo is a classic because of the impact it made when it hits the market, while Inside is a classic because it still hits. Playdead cooked once and it resulted in a signature dish, which they didn't just reheat and serve again. Instead, they reworked the recipe to enhance that signature flavor further the second time. Number 10. Papers, Please. This is another game that I can't believe it took me so long to finally play. Weirdly enough, it was Valhalla that made me decide to finally try it out, because I thought, oh, you know what? I could do with another game like Valhalla right now. I could play another game where I just clock in and out of my day job and talk to people, you know, prepare stuff for them, listen to their stories. I thought it would be a chill time. Now I know what you're going to say. Sarp, are you stupid? What about this game signaled chill or cozy to you? Like, Like, even if you didn't deliberately search up anything about it going in, didn't you at least know about the basic premise or something? Didn't you ever see a meme or a short synopsis or like 5 minutes of gameplay before? Well, I had, but it was of the first 5 minutes, so everything seemed pretty manageable, and it's been a long time since I've seen it, okay? So I thought the whole immense pressure of working under an oppressive authoritarian regime thing would be like just for atmosphere and story, you know? I thought it would just be for the vibes, bro. It's a desk job game. How stressful can it really be? Very stressful, turns out. Like actual real life desk job type of stressful and then some. If I had known it would be like this, I would have taken like a whole ass Udemy course on border control before playing, cause holy shit. I'm already so uncomfortable with time limits in games that it will actually sour my whole experience sometimes where I would otherwise love it. There are exceptions like Unsighted where it only gradually gets more tense, and that works wonders as you approach the final sections of the game and feel the stakes getting heavier and heavier. But for Risk of Rain 2 for instance, it made me quit where I would otherwise sink more hours into it because I don't like to have to speedrun things even in a roguelike. I like to do things at my own pace and leisure. If the game was the type that would let me comfortably explore each of its floors and open every chest if I wanted to, I would have stayed with it for much longer. So you could easily guess that the moment I realized there was a time limit for each day in Papers, Please, I knew it was already over for me. The game could stay at the same level of complexity and difficulty for the whole playthrough after that moment and I still wouldn't have had a fun time. The funny thing is, of course, it didn't do that, not in the slightest. The job only got harder and harder each day. At first it was just the passports and the IDs, then I had to check some travel passes, and then I had to also do body scans, and then some more documents got introduced and I had to decide whether to detain people or not because I didn't want to overdo it with the cruelty. But on the other hand, it would give me some extra money and I could really use that to treat my sickly son because otherwise he's going to probably die tomorrow. And as if it was not already chaotic enough spreading everything over my desk and frantically checking each little detail while the clock kept ticking, still making mistakes despite all that effort and losing money because of it, people also began to try and bribe me and I had to gauge whether I should take that or not because my son is now already dead, so I should at least make sure that I don't lose my wife as well. I really need that extra money to give her the food and medicine she needs, but what if I get caught and then they execute both of us anyway? Let me be clear, this game does what it sets out to do absolutely flawlessly. It forces you to make difficult decisions and terrible things because you yourself are otherwise fucked too. It makes you experience firsthand what sort of monster you could become, what sort of things you could be forced to do for your own oppressors, and it's so uncomfortable. It's like the fucking Stanley Milgram experiment on steroids. The ultimate decision comes down to whether you want to A. risk everything and secretly help this underground rebel organization so that you can maybe create a better future for everyone free of this tyranny, B. forge some fake passports and haul ass with what remains of your family to some other country, or C. choose the status quo and stay a loyal monster because at least you can guarantee you won't get caught or executed that way. These are the three main endings you can get at the end, and there are countless other bad endings you can prematurely get before that point too, so you have to remain focused and endure all the stress until then. And I'm just going to be completely real with you, I couldn't even do that. I legitimately, deliberately triggered a bad ending after I was like 75% done with the game because I just couldn't take it anymore. I was like, let me out, please just end it. And I later looked up the real endings from YouTube. Again, it's not the game, it's all me. Diagnosis, genuine skill issue. If you guys aren't like me and you like it when a game stresses you out, like you've just been accused of stabbing someone 28 times, play Papers, Please if you haven't already. Otherwise, don't. Stay the fuck away. I sure as hell wish I did. I feel like my hair is going to go grey a year earlier now solely because of the mere 3.8 hours I spent with this game. Holy shit. Number 11. Baba Is You. I already knew for a fact before going in that I was going to suck at this game, but still, I just had to try it for myself after all the buzz about it. I was sure it would be another Polybridge situation where I would be able to complete maybe 2 or 3 worlds before the next one made me give up. Turns out I was still overestimating myself. I managed to complete so little of Baba Is You that I'm not even sure if I deserve to put it on this list. One reason I'm doing so anyway is to document for everyone right here and now that it is a game I have now tried for myself, that it is no longer on the backlog. That's what this series is about after all. Another reason is that I feel the small bite I took of this one is already enough for me to guess just how far the rest of the game will push players devs to use all their brain power to think outside of the box in order to find the solutions to the game's immensely creative puzzles further on. Even a handful of these earlier levels made me feel like a genius after solving them and made me appreciate how cleverly they were designed. Despite its difficulty, it's also so hard to get mad at the game with how peaceful it feels to play. The minimalist art style not only works in favor of the puzzle's readability, but it also looks like it was drawn by a kid, which is just so adorable and breathes so much life into the game. The soundtrack is equally as simple but adds to the vibe all the same. You're also given no time limit or any such mechanic that would pressure you into solving things as fast or flawlessly as you can. On the contrary, you can always undo your last move and even restart the whole level with the press of a single button whenever you'd like. It might always be a challenge to solve the puzzle, but you never feel stress or frustration thanks to these design choices. It may not be an easy game, but it feels cozy and relaxing to play because you're always encouraged to figure things out at your own pace and try out new strategies without any fear of negative consequences for it. Unfortunately, that all still wasn't enough to keep me from giving up after a certain point, since I still had plenty of external pressure thanks to the 100 other games still sitting in my backlog. I certainly would have pushed on for longer if I felt I had more time, patience or brain power to spend for Baba, so if you're unlike me and actually have more of those things, I highly recommend checking it out. Diagnosis: genuine skill issue again. Game is hard, Baba is you, brain is fried. Number 12. Mouthwashing. You guys have no idea how hard it was for me to keep myself from being spoiled for this one. After Baba is you, I couldn't really play anything else for about 4 months since I was really busy with work, with my videos on other games and with a bunch of other life stuff. And during that time, Mouthwashing was absolutely blowing up everywhere. I was seeing streams, essays and podcast episodes on it from a bunch of channels I followed. I was seeing memes about it and cosplays of its characters. It was a lot out of nowhere, and so it got me intrigued enough to dodge almost all of it. I say almost since I unfortunately couldn't go in completely blind, but at least the info I had beforehand was still pretty minor. I knew the names, faces and some of the basic characteristics of the cast, for instance, along with which one turned out to be the villain of the story. But I didn't know why, which is basically what the game is about, so I'd say that my experience was like 95% unaffected. And I'm glad for that, since even though I didn't absolutely fall in love with this experience as much as most people I've seen did, it was still well worth the money and time investment. Mouthwashing is a short narrative psychological horror experience that lives up to everything that phrase implies. It almost flawlessly executes what it sets out to do. My only two nitpicks would be that a couple of the sections with actual threats drag on for a bit too long, which takes away from the tension and horror of those sections, and that the creepy transition effect in between scenes when the game acts as if it's glitching out does feel really unsettling the first few times but gets old after a while. These are really minor things though, and everything that's great about the game easily makes up for them. I love how well the non-linear storytelling works here and how well balanced the text and subtext are. It hits that perfect sweet spot of rewarding the players who pay a little more attention and read between the lines, while still providing a satisfying base experience for everyone else to appreciate as well. The horror is also genuinely effective most of the time. It never relies on jump scares or sudden loud noises outside of like one instance I can think of throughout the whole game. Instead, it puts you on the edge of your seat thanks to either its impeccably oppressive atmosphere or the anxiety-inducing tension among the cast that grows more and more as the situation gets more and more bleak, constantly signaling that everything is about to reach its breaking point and it's going to be a whole other nightmare than even this current situation. I won't ramble on for longer since we still have a bunch more games to go through, but the TLDR is that Mouthwashing is really good and you should play it if you're into psychological horror and can handle depictions of some really heavy subjects from sexual assault to suicide. If you endure that, you will find a haunting story that is willing to explore the best and worst of humanity, especially when we are put in extreme situations that make the masks slip and cause our true selves to surface. I mean it wholeheartedly when I say it's only due to personal taste rather than any objective flaw or shortcoming of the game that I didn't fall in love with it as much as I expected to after hearing all the praise for it. All that praise is still deserved, but it's also important to remember that not all games are for everyone and certain experiences will always resonate more with some people more than it does with others, no matter how perfectly crafted they are. Number 13. 1000 Times Resist. Just like Mouthwashing, 1000 Times Resist was a game I kept hearing the highest praises for during that same gaming free 4-month period. It wasn't absolutely everywhere like Mouthwashing, Mouthwashing was, but what I'd seen was still enough for me to, again, deliberately dodge anything else about the game until I played it for myself right after Mouthwashing. Unfortunately though, this time I felt kind of disappointed and all the praise I had been hearing about the game seemed overblown. For starters, I've seen so many call this game a masterpiece in storytelling, and while I do appreciate its storytelling, I don't really understand where this powerful of a sentiment comes from. There is again plenty of jumping back and forwards through time like Mouthwashing, but I don't think it's implemented as well here, which is a shame because it actually has the right foundation for it to work even better. You see, jumping back and forth between different time frames is an actual gameplay mechanic in this one, and it's introduced in the first chapter along with a few simple puzzles and little secrets you can find by using it to your advantage. Naturally, after that point, you would expect the game to introduce more and more involved puzzles that expected you to utilize those time traveling powers in more clever ways. Kind of like that one level in Dishonored 2 for those that are familiar. I would obviously not expect the same level of quality as that, since not only is Dishonored 2 the product of a larger development team with a larger budget and larger amount of experience, but that level itself is even more masterfully crafted than the rest of the game and shines as the title's magnum opus for me. With that being said though, I would still expect 1000 times Resist to at least try to keep using this mechanic in somewhat interesting ways, but it doesn't even get the same kind of simple uses for puzzle solving as in chapter 1, which is meant to be its tutorial. It gets nothing after that, which is mind-boggling to me. The second to last chapter I think is the absolute worst offender of this, where you are trying to piece together how a group of people died and which among them has what you're looking for. There are like 15 different time frames you can jump to, and you know how you go through them? You start from the earliest one because you have to, since all the other ones are locked, and once you exhaust all the dialogue in this time frame, you unlock the next one and do the same there to unlock the next one, and so on until you're at the last time frame where you see how everyone died and who the important guy is. And you know what is worse? There are 2 floors of this area, and everyone whose dialogue you're listening to keeps switching what floor they're on in between the time frames, so you constantly have to go up and down through these inconveniently placed stairs in between the 2 floors as well. Structurally, it makes sense why the stairs are there, but you know how we could have avoided using them? There is this grappling hook mechanic in the game where you can pull yourself towards these special nodes that are suspended in the air, which only you can see or use during these time hopping segments. Why not just put one of those on each floor? This room didn't need to comprise of 2 floors. The people we are investigating did not need to constantly switch between these floors, and the traversal in between those floors did not need to be so tedious. This whole section just feels like something you would see in some mid-tier Ubisoft. It feels like when big budget AAA games have these long stretches of walking or horse riding segments through nothing just to artificially pad the playtime so they can boast about how many hours of content they have. And in the game does not have to do this, so why does it feel like 1000 times Resist tries to do so at every turn? That grappling hook mechanic I just mentioned, it's the same deal as the time hopping one. It's never used in an interesting way. There are never any non-linear secret or alternate paths to explore with it. It's always one path towards a single goal, and the most that's done on the way is that sometimes the next node is kind of hard to spot, which doesn't matter anyway since you can freeze time and look for it without any pressure whenever you want. All these issues make up one huge problem which really pains me to address because I am genuinely open to so many different types of video games. I don't need everything to have deep gameplay. I can enjoy visual novels like Valhalla. I can enjoy walking sims or highly cinematic experiences that are basically more interactive movies than games like Detroit Become Human. And I do think that what little gameplay those titles have still work in their favor and make them more engaging than they would be as just movies or books. It is so rare that I say this, but that situation is the exact opposite for 1000 times Resist. Let me be absolutely clear. I do like the story and themes of this game. I like the characters and their designs. I did care about their struggles and relationships. I especially like the one choice at the end given to the player which decides the game's ending. I really appreciate the thought, ambition and creativity that was put into crafting this unique world and its story. And I do understand why this game resonated with some people so much. I appreciate what it says, and I do think that we need more media out there to remind us that resistance is in our blood, in all of of us, especially when everyone and everything has deliberately been trying to feed us this narrative that protests or activism is cringe, useless, or conducted by dumb fuck losers which have no idea what would actually help raise awareness or incentivize action. Did you know that Just Stop Oil is financially backed by a literal oil baroness, by the way? Anyways, sorry I got a little carried away there, but the fact that I did should give you an idea about how effective this story is. It's just that whenever it wanted me to pick up that controller and carry my ass to the next NPC again, I didn't want to. I don't think at all that 1000 times resist is a story that cannot work as a video game. Most stories can work in any medium they like, but the choice of which one is going to be also has to be justified by how they then use that medium to their advantage. I don't think that this was an issue of the game being rushed, because it is like this the whole way, from the very beginning that these mechanics were introduced until the very end. I would rather not be given a grappling hook ability at all than have to use one like this for the whole game. The same goes for the time hopping mechanic. As it is, I'm really sorry, but it would have worked better as a set of flashbacks in a movie, show, comic book or novel. And I'm even more sorry to say that I wish I had watched someone else play this game rather than playing it myself. That's my verdict on 1000 times resist. Great story, but horrible utilization of the medium it picked to tell it through, which is why I could never bring myself to call its storytelling masterful or the game itself a masterpiece. I still do appreciate the ambition, care and effort that went into it, and wish the developers the best of luck with their next project. Number 14. F.E.A.R. I've been hearing about this game's satisfying combat and impressive enemy AI for quite a while now, and it actually lives up to the hype in those aspects. The times and positions in which the enemies decide to flank, retreat, reload, or really perform any action do make them feel like they're genuinely strategizing. The explosive gunplay is especially fun to engage in thanks to the meticulously implemented particle effects, environmental damage, the occasional utter vaporization of enemies into meat chunks and mists of blood, and of course that famous slow-mo. If you're interested in the technical breakdown of how these things work in tandem to elevate one another and form one satisfying hell of a gameplay loop, I highly recommend watching White Light's video on the game. It does a phenomenal job explaining the gears turning behind the scenes. Unfortunately, not all the gears are as well oiled as the ones I've listed though. Let's get to the elephant mascot in the room first. I'm talking about the spooky ring girl on the cover, if you can't tell. You know, the thing that's the most front and center the moment you look into this game for the first time. And if you have indeed ever looked into the game before, this is probably not going to be the first time you're hearing this, and it's probably an ice cold take, but this girl and everything about her does the story more harm than good. Too often does this game pause the action to send you to some bloody hospital corridor flashback that's about as scary as a Pomeranian and as engaging as staring at a cactus, or replace it with some dumbass ghost zombies that just mindlessly charge at you rather than do any of that cool AI shit. Oh, and they don't ragdoll, get dismembered or pinned on walls either. They just disappear completely the moment a single pellet hits them. Very fun. Nothing about this game's horror works in the slightest unless you're horrified of boredom, and I genuinely believe it would have been a better product if it swapped those elements out for even more of a focus on its action. I can't count how many times I wondered if I had even more guns to choose from, more types of enemies to test my metal against, more movement options during which I could keep shooting to make those slow-mo uses even more hype, or you know, actually listen to some blood-pumping combat music every now and then instead of this constant supposedly atmospheric ambient droning that got irritating just 10 minutes into the game. One other thing we need to touch on is the level design, which is a blessing half of the time and a curse the other half of the time. When it works, it's what actually lets that enemy AI put on its best display, and when it doesn't, it's what keeps it from doing so. The combat arenas that have some verticality and or interconnectivity let the enemies actually flank, lure or flush you out and make for some great battles, while the ones that do not have these qualities just allow you to wipe everyone out without a scratch in a single slow-mo. Not only that, but they can also make navigation confusing and make you have to rely on looking for the yellow lights and ladders to follow. There's also a story which I couldn't follow at all and thus cannot really give a verdict on. I'm sure it's serviceable at least, but I genuinely couldn't be asked to sit idly by some recording device so often to piece together the information it's spitting about the Ghost Girl experiments, which I already hated in the first place, like I said. Overall, F.E.A.R indeed still holds up thanks to its most beloved aspects, but unfortunately the rest of what it has to offer often gets in the way and drags what could have been a great great experience down to just a good one. Also, keep in mind that this is just regarding the base game. I've tried playing the DLCs, but both of them either kept crashing or having massive frame rate drops constantly no matter what I tried, so I gave up on them. I didn't need what I'm guessing is essentially just more fear that bad. Number 15, F.E.A.R 2. I can only describe this game among one of the most profoundly mid titles I have ever played. It's very much your typical 7th gen army guy shooter where you have your little squad of the responsible lieutenant guy, your friendly APC driver guy, the slightly unhinged guy that keeps pushing your buttons, and the girl who does things by the book but also really cares about everyone and everything, so they also make her your closest companion in the hopes that maybe you will develop some sort of attachment to someone at least. It doesn't really work, of course, unless you're someone who really gets easily attached to stories and characters, or someone who's played like 2 video games and watched 3 movies before, so this sort of thing is a special occasion despite how generic it is. I know this part of the script kind of feels like I'm trying to reach some word limit, and you're not too far off actually, cause I don't even know what I can say about this game. Like, even if I try to individually break down everything, I'm just going to say the same thing as I said at the beginning, because nothing at all is really great or offensively terrible. The gun variety is mid and shooting them doesn't feel as great as the first game besides the sniper rifle, which you get like 3 times or something. The enemy variety is better than the first game I guess, but it's still nothing praiseworthy since some of them are just annoying additions. The set pieces are whatever unless you've never played a 7th gen military shooter with mechs before. The horror deserves no comment besides the huge fucking Limbo like the first game. I don't remember any of the characters' names besides the protagonist solely because of how often people yell it, and the story is not interesting in the slightest until the final scene, which is so hilarious and ends so abruptly that it actually got me laughing at how absurd it is. That is the most entertainment this game provided me, right at the end for like 10 seconds. One thing I would say isn't mid but actually bad is the difficulty balance. The shotgun enemies in particular on hard mode are so much more overpowered than everything else for some reason. Like, you can be on full health and have more than half your shield on top of it, and the shotgun blast from mid range will sometimes one-shot you. Normal on the other hand is so piss easy that I can't even begin to imagine what easy is like. It probably plays the game for you or spawns no enemies like Minecraft on peaceful mode. It sucks, but I ended up choosing normal over hard after all because I would rather get through a game I'm not enjoying faster than make it more frustrating for myself. My final verdict is that I guess you can play F.E.A.R 2 to pass the time or distract yourself for a while if you don't feel like doing anything else. It beats staring at the ceiling and overthinking about possible bad futures at least. There's also a 1-hour DLC called Reborn, which is a mild improvement over the base game. Normal isn't actually piece easy this time and provides a reasonable challenge level for what normal implies. There are a few interesting combat encounters and it's a neat idea to play as one of the replica soldiers for a change, aka the bad guys. It's a shame that we still fight other replica soldiers instead of the good guys though. Number 16, F.E.A.R 3. I hate this game. This is the type of game that makes you look at itself and the first game and ask, what happened? How the hell did we get here? The second game was kind of COD adjacent, but this one is literally a cover shooter with regenerating health that flashes obnoxious battle point notifications on the screen whenever I pull off a mildly cool move. There is an actual gunship fight where you have to shoot like 3 rockets at it to progress. How could you decide to just throw away your series identity for this when it just doesn't work with the staple mechanics you have? I don't want to constantly sit behind cover and wait for my health to regenerate when I could be blasting enemy after enemy in the middle of the battlefield while pumping 2 medkits a second to sustain myself. That's what made the original game so fun, and it's discouraged here in more ways than one because I don't know if it's just me, but slow-mo feels like it lasts for such a short time in this game and takes so long to recharge. The second game's slow-mo also felt a little shorter than that of the first, but this time it actually crosses the threshold of making the game unfun. And despite all this discouragement, I still rejected the intended way to play this game, but that was only viable in easy mode, so I switched it to that. You may think less of me for that if you'd like, but I've already stated my reasonings for it in the F.E.A.R 2 section, so I'm not going to dwell on it more. The horror sucks again as always, it's a fucking meme at this point, though I'm not sure if the story sucks even harder this time because there's just like one character. There is literally just Paxton, and I don't know who in the world likes or care about this character so much because you might as well put him on the box instead of Olma at this point. He's even playable this time, and every mission can also be played co-op with one person controlling him and the other one controlling the regular Mr. Shoot Guy protagonist. Paxton apparently plays very differently than him, which means the game could be more fun that way, but I was already so sick of this title by the time I was finished that I really didn't want to try, so I'm going to be fair and mention that here. Maybe the game is better when you play as Paxton or play co-op mode, but let's be real, every game that has co-op is more fun when you play co-op, and for each mission, Paxton is unlocked only after you finish it once regularly, so even if it's more fun to play, you still have to experience beforehand what I have experienced, which I don't recommend. Number 17. Thank goodness you're here. There isn't really much to say about this game since there isn't much game here. All you do is move around and slap people or things to complete a bunch of menial tasks given to you by random people around this little town. There are your movement controls and a single button to slap. The draw of this game though is the humor, along with the silly looking cartoony art and animation style that accompanies it to create the riskiest of all things, comedy. This is a full-on comedy game, and so how much you're going to enjoy it is entirely going to depend on your sense of humor. It is very random and absurd humor most of the time. It kind of reminds me of like 2010's YouTube Newground animation type humor, except less horny and edgy than most of those. It's also a very British game, to the point that the game essentially asks you when you first boot it up how familiar you are with the British way of talking and adjusts the dialogue according to that. Speaking from my own experience, as long as you honestly answer that at the start, I don't think the Britishness of the game is going to cause any major problems in your ability to understand the jokes. However, a few references and things like that here and there probably did fly over my head, I'm guessing, and they might fly over yours too. Nevertheless, I enjoyed my 3 hours, which I think is just the perfect length for a game like this. Any more than that and the comedy could have begun getting stale, I feel. I wasn't really belly laughing at anything in the first place, but it was sufficiently amusing to keep me entertained for an evening. Number 18. Pankapu. This game surprised me with how fun it was. I had never heard about it before, and I only got it recently because I came across a random post saying it was free to grab for a limited time. I wasn't expecting much from Pankapu, and it's certainly nothing mind-blowing. It doesn't do anything that's never been seen before. It's pretty simple and formulaic in both its narrative and gameplay, but what makes it great nonetheless is that it knows how to perfectly implement that formula. The pace at which your character gets stronger by gaining new abilities, the pace at which you become more accustomed to the game's system and your skill increases as a result, and the pace at which the difficulty ramps up with new, more powerful enemies and obstacles to match that skill increase and thus still present you a challenge, are all perfect. The boss fights were also unexpectedly great, as most of them were perfect skill checks that ask you to use everything you have learned so far, and the few that weren't were still not gimmicky in a frustrating sense. Those gimmicks instead made those fights more creative and interesting, I thought. On the other hand, the one weakness this game has in my opinion is the occasional lack of tutorialization at times, where it would have encouraged the player to try out what's new in their arsenal instead of sticking to what they know. There's the guidebook thing you can check out whenever you pause the game, but the information is still either not very convenient to get to or just not very well explained most of the time. This isn't always the case, as both the tutorialization and the way the level design pushes you to experiment with your new abilities are sufficient whenever a new one of the main 3 forms you can switch between is introduced. But besides these 3 main forms, you also have 4 different elemental sub-forms for each of them, which do not change your moveset but change the effects, range or AoE of your moves. It is whenever one of these sub-forms are added to your arsenal that the game is not only completely quiet about it, but also unwilling to introduce anything in the level itself that would nudge you towards trying it. I'm not asking for outright hand-holding, but the number of times when I got one of these new sub-forms and didn't even remember to switch to it and try out what it does until like 6 levels after was astounding. My own way of playing games obviously factors into this as well, but I still think the game should at least give some sort of signal every now and then to remind you that you have more sub-forms than what you become accustomed to so far, and that some of them are indeed significantly more effective than others in certain situations, just like your main forms are. Now, although I rambled so much about it at this point, this is still not that big of an issue all things considered, as it still doesn't take too much away from the game even at its worst, and it may not even be an issue for you ever if you are not as much of an airhead as me and actually pay attention to what's new on your UI, or if you are inherently more drawn to experimenting with new abilities rather than sticking to what you already know and has proved useful. Regardless, games, I wholeheartedly recommend that you check out Pankapu, though maybe buy it on sale. Like I said, it's a simple and formulaic game that doesn't have too much content either. Chapter 2, which is listed as DLC, is actually not much of an add-on, but straight up just the second half of the full game. The base game is basically incomplete without it, so you either have to buy both or none. Together, the cost amounts to $19, which is a bit much, I'd say. If you get it on like a 40% sale at the least, I'd say the game is well worth the money and time investment, and it definitely needs more eyes on it. And finally, number 19, Ghost Trick Phantom Detective. I was kind of reluctant on whether I should buy this game or not at first, because I had only heard about it from like 2 people on the internet. However, they were so adamant on how good it was that I decided to give it a look, but I was still only cautiously optimistic. I mean, it looked charming enough, but it would really have to do more than that to justify its price tag considering its length according to HLTB. Well, it did much more than that and then some too. Holy shit guys, this game is so fucking good. I loved this one so much that I didn't even follow through with my plan of playing one more game before this video to round the list up to a nice 20, because I wanted to end it on the highest note with this one instead. You guys know how the backlog struggle goes. Even if you're really enjoying yourself with a game, there's still this constant voice in your head telling you to get it over with already and get to the next one, cause otherwise you're never going to catch up. Those 100 games still looking at you from their dusty shelves are going to be 105 the next month and so on. Now, this doesn't mean you just beeline the main story from objective to objective for each game and that's that, of course, but it does mean that you only add the side content that's essential to the overall experience on top of that and move on. Like, you probably should fight all the Valkyries in God of War 2018 for a more satisfying experience, but maybe stop trying to find all the Odin Ravens or open every Niflheim chest, because what the fuck are you doing, bro? Come on, pick it up. I don't care how much you like a game, time is running out and you have none of it to spare for replays or completionism. I know how much of a toxic mindset this sounds like, and it is to a certain extent, but I can assure you that it doesn't have full control over me, because I got so obsessed with Ghost Trick that I said fuck you to that voice for once and went out of my way to go back and 100% everything after finishing it, and I still wish there was so much more. I so rarely say this nowadays, but fuck the backlog, dude. I wish I could stay here for even longer. This is probably straight up my favorite game on this list overall. That includes Dark Souls 3 and Sanabi, which were so good that each of them got its own individual video on this channel. Well, Sanabi got a third of one, but you get the point. And that may make you ask why I'm talking about this game here instead of its own video too. Well, it's because I don't even know what I would say besides how much I love everything over and over. There's no deep theme, life-changing message or convoluted lore with this one to dissect and discuss for an hour. It's just a pure joyride that's beyond perfect from top to bottom, oozing with passion and creativity. I love the gameplay, the writing, the pacing, the difficulty curve of the puzzles, the characters, the art style, the animations, the soundtrack, just everything is so peak, dude. It's so cinema. The one thing that I guess does feel missing is the ability to fast forward time. There is an ability to fast forward the dialogue, but the inability to fast forward anything else can sometimes make you wait idly for a key moment to happen in your repeat attempts at a puzzle, which can get old sometimes, but this is honestly such a minor issue since nothing in them takes that long to happen anyway. Besides, I love watching all these characters do whatever they do so much that I could never be bothered by this. I could watch Lynn demolish that chicken on loop for 10 hours without blinking. So that's it for this one. I'll see you all next year around this time as usual for another episode, and also sooner of course with more regular videos. Until then, as always, take care of yourselves and thank you for watching.